Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third session of the day. I think things have been going really well. We've got lots of engaged and enthusiastic participants today. And so nice to see that we've got another full crowd for our evening session. We've only got a couple of folks on this one. This is a session that is highlighting the first person plural project. So I'm going to introduce Susan Kendrick-Perry and Joe Blatti, and then I'm going to turn it over to them, and they've got a presentation ready for you. They'll sort of co-present, and then when they're finished, we'll have a question and answer session. And so if you would, as you think of them, place your questions in the chat feature. If you put them in the Q&A, that's fine too. I'll still find them. And a couple things to keep in mind is that this session is recorded and it'll be available at a later date on the Arkansas Historical Association's YouTube channel. And also, hopefully you guys will stick around for a survey when the session is over. And that helps us with our grant funding and sort of getting feedback for these kinds of events. So all you'll have to do is when we've completely finished with the session and you X out of your Zoom screen, it'll pop up. When you leave the webinar, you'll get a little pop-up for that survey. So please take a second to fill that out for us. All right, so our presenters tonight are Susan Kendrick-Perry, who is Director of Operations at the David and Barbara Pryor Center for Arkansas Oral and Visual History. Susan has worked in the field of education for 30 years, first as a special education teacher in Dickinson, Texas, as an editor and curriculum designer for interactive programming at EMG Networks in Scottsdale, Arizona, and as an editor and website administrator at Pearson School Systems in Chandler, Arizona. She joined the Pryor Center in 2009. Susan has worked with Joe Blatti from the beginning of First Person Plural's collaboration with the Pryor Center in 2011. The Pryor Center provided digital recording equipment, processed and archived materials, and made the material available to the public on the Pryor Center website. The Pryor Center is honored to be one of the repositories of this important collection of the voices of women in Arkansas. And Joe Blatti is a social historian based in Little Rock, with many years' experience in community and oral history projects. Her oral history experience includes archival projects for the Minnesota Governor's Office, the National Women's Press Club, and the Minneapolis Foundation. Her audio documentaries, produced with support from the NEH, NYSCA, and others, were broadcast widely on local stations and NPR. Blatti currently serves as director of First Person Plural in Oral History of Arkansas Women, which is a statewide public project that collects life histories and explores diverse experiences of civic engagement. This collaborative project involves Just Communities of Arkansas, the U of A Little Rock Center for History and Culture, and the Pryor Center for Arkansas Oral and Visual History, as well as other partners. Another recent oral history project, If a Stranger Sojourns with Thee, documented Latino migration to North Arkansas from Hispanic and Anglo perspectives. Blatti's oral history work is archived at the University of Buffalo, the Minnesota Historical Society, Lyon College, and the Library of Congress. With sculptor Sandra Menifee Taylor and photographer Linda Gamble, Joe Blatti created Landscape of Hope and Despair, an artist's book based on oral history and other interpretive documentation of a Minnesota farm site, with support from Jerome/Minnesota Center for Book Arts. Other publications include Harry Miller's Vision of Arkansas and A.C. Pickett's Private Journal of the U.S.-Mexican War. She's currently working on research and writing that focus on the Reconstruction and Progressive Era topics. Blatti participated in developing the Oral History Evaluation Guidelines, and that's the title of a book, and has served on many boards regionally and nationally, including the Arkansas Women's History Institute, the Arkansas Historical Association, and the editorial board for The Public Historian, a journal of the National Council of Public History. She participates regularly in conferences and other professional activities in Arkansas and elsewhere. Blatti received a BA from McAllister College and an MA from the University of Buffalo. So now I will turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you. That was incredibly kind of you. I think we're ready to start the PowerPoint. If you can put that up, Susan.
Can you see it?
Great. This is a joint presentation. Susan and I put together a joint presentation, and half a dozen years ago, I reported actually to this group on first person as a work in progress, and I only talked about the armature of the project and a couple of our interviews. And at that time, we'd done about 2/3 of the planned interviews statewide. We'd created a free traveling exhibit showcasing some of those interviews. We'd created our website, and of course, we had our working relationships with the Pryor Center and the archives at Little Rock. And since then, we've initiated an occasional public program series with colleges and museums that features regional and national scholars, artists, and community members who are doing oral histories and public programs that involve oral history and public history. And now that we've completed the planned interview project, Susan and I are really going to reflect on at least part of what we can see in the interviews as a group. And what we're going to do is share a thematically related group of selections from the projects. The joke in oral history is there is none if you can't really share it. And so we're going to be sharing words and images organized around themes of race relations, community, and access in the state. And before I do that, I'm going to give just a real quick overview of the armature through which we collected and recorded the interviews. This is the website for First Person Plural. We did focus on statewide life stories. Our time period was those who came of age in the second half of the 20th century, basically women in their 60s through their 80s at the time of the interview. We were specifically interested in accounts that explored widely shared life experiences, family life, education, religious influence, courtship, work experience, community service, and also life histories that intersect with larger cultural and historical change. The long civil rights movement, the second women's movement, changes in technology. So we were looking for the relationship between the general and the particular, the intersection of those personal accounts with larger frames of reference, opportunities open to women of the time, conscious decisions to try something new, or perhaps maintain traditions, maybe bend them a little bit. Our principles of selection explicitly address that basic timeline, participation in and or witness to change, and the capacity to reflect. The theoretical underpinnings for the project rests on a constellation of underpinnings. The Oral History Association's principles and best practices, just standard belt and suspenders research, the kind of research any historian does, 20th century Arkansas history, relevant situations, often nationally, law, education, more regionally specific community histories, background on individuals before we talk to them, if we can get that information. The kind of work that Daphne Patai, Sherna Gluck, and others, Sue Armitage, did on feminist oral history, more recent work on intersectionality, and also a commitment to diversity. The Black-White dyad in Arkansas was a given, but because we all live, complicated lives, that expanded to include others. The Native presence in Arkansas, members of the Delta Chinese community who are deeply familiar to anybody who grew up on the Delta, women religious, again, present in Arkansas from very early territorial days. At least one of our narrators spoke with some candor about being out as a lesbian woman. And so we tried to reflect what many people have as everyday life experience and not to silo in the model that we created. And finally, an attention to volunteerism and philanthropy. We were very alert to the limits of the social safety net in Arkansas, past and present, and the activities of women in assisting fellow citizens. And this led to collecting information that explored female roles in social justice, philanthropy, food banks, voter rights, and legislative affairs. So as we worked on this collective portrait, one of the things you can see if you look at a broad swath of interviews is kind of somehow I think of it visually as a curve from Northeast Arkansas to Central Arkansas, down along the Delta, across the center of the state, west, across the whole state. Conversations with Mary Gay Shipley, Marion Lacey, Sybil Jordan Hampton, Kathy Webb, Mary Dillard, Cora McHenry, many others as you look at the list that's posted. A picture of growing up in 1950s and 60s Arkansas across class, race, urban, and rural sectors. Looking at many of the same interviews, the women offer views of coming up in changing, desegregating society as children and adults. And we're going to begin choosing selections now. As the civil rights movement gained momentum nationally, Sybil Jordan Hampton, one of the African-American students who followed the Little Rock Nine into Central High School and was among the first to actually graduate the school, remembered her college years at Earlham, a Quaker school farther east in Indiana.
Susan, I think you need to unmute yourself in order for us to hear the clip.
But
Oh my goodness. Okay, let me start this over.
Earlham was in a setting that was truly up south, and so that you constantly were having to remember and negotiate all the different ways in which things around us in Richmond and in the surrounding communities. What were the rules in the surrounding communities?
Okay, Joe, do you want me to start that one over so everyone can hear it from the
Yeah.
beginning? Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Let's try it. Oops.
Because Earlham literally was in a setting that was extremely inhospitable to the kind of campus that it was, and to the kind of flavor of the campus, and to the kind of vision and values of the campus. And I became copy editor of the student newspaper, and the paper was typeset in Connorsville, Arkansas. And just prior to my becoming copy editor, Connorsville had been a sundown town. And so it was very striking for me to go and live in a place that was up south.
So you were moving from one place to another.
But Earlham was not up south, but Earlham was in a setting that was truly up south. And so that you constantly were having to remember and negotiate all the different ways in which things around us in Richmond and in the surrounding communities, what were the rules in the surrounding communities?
Okay, here's Mary Gay Shipley talking about events in Blytheville at almost exactly the same time.
They were arrested for taking people to a state park on the 4th of July. And Daddy was very concerned about his oldest child being arrested. And he was also concerned of what was going to happen if it became knowledge in the town, which of course it was going to be known in the town. So that's when the conversations kind of surfaced, and they were not necessarily nice ones. They were frustrated and scared.
So do you remember how you felt about that?
Well, you know, I felt like that perhaps my job was to be there and help them, kind of a peacemaker. And that kind of saw that as my role. I don't know that I did a very good job with that, but.
Cora McHenry started her career as a French teacher in Camden. Here she recalls the merger of the Black and White Teachers Organizations right about 1970. In her case, this was a springboard for a very public career that included a lengthy stint on Dale Bumper's Brain Trust and later directorship as the first woman and Black of the organization that she discusses here.
I was on the committee that negotiated the merger between the ATA and the AEA. I was still in the classroom, but I was a leader in the ATA.
It's the African American organization.
Yes, Arkansas Teachers Association.
Which has all, and both these organizations have very long histories, right? They go way back into the 19th century.
Yes. In fact, after during the merger discussions, one of the things we grew up was that they would seek 3 persons on the 28-member board of the AEA. So some people say it was not a merger, and absorption. I don't necessarily agree with that. But it was the director of the AEA, Forrest Roselle, called me one day at school and asked me if I would come and join the staff of the AEA, if I would move from Camden to Little Rock and come go to work for the Teachers Association, based on, I guess, some of the discussions he had, some of the ways he'd seen me carry myself, and the
Connection was made.
that connection was actually made. He made the offer in September that would have been the first full semester that the Camden Public Schools and Lincoln Public Schools were in the process of trying to negotiate some kind of merger.
So that was
Mentioned I
not
taught
family
French.
merger.
That's right. That's right. They were merging the school districts, best school districts, etc. And I had just built, I had not built, but I had encouraged the school to build a language lab. Camden had at that point one of the best language labs where I taught French. Like you had your earphones on at the booths, the stations. My students could do it, and they learned from native French speakers. And I could monitor and help them one-on-one. That would have been my first opportunity to make full use of that. So I asked that, I responded to Mr. Roselle, if you can hold that job open until January. September, when the next, when it was, it's July, I remember, because we were all going to the National Teachers League that year. It's if you can hold the job open until July, and I can finish this school year, let them make graduation, let my students whom I taught all year, let me see them through this year and see how well they do. Then I will consider. And that's how I got to move on to the Teachers Association.
Marion Lacey, McHenley's friend and neighbor, came up about the same time and shared memories of her work as a teacher and principal in several Little Rock schools. She was also later an administrator in the district.
If you aren't careful, you're not going to be a chance to you won't get a chance to be an educational leader because you're so busy running the school. You're so busy listening to parents. These things you have to do. Yeah. But you can't let them take your whole day or whole. I used to, and then I learned that Dunbar. I learned that when Miss Smith came in with an issue about her child, she didn't know this, but I did like a doctor. I'm going to give her 10 full minutes, where she can say everything she wants to say. And then I'm going to say, now let me tell you and sometimes they won't, they'll say, well, I'm not through. I said, but I have to go when the bell is getting ready to ring, and I'm going to go out and see our students. And then I said, what I'm going to do is 1, 2, 3. And I always gave them an assignment. So you call me back tomorrow, or either you send me what are you going to do with Johnny at home? What are some things you want to straighten out with him there? And then I'll have a plan, or I'll have a teacher group who would have a plan that we can do. I always decided to do that. And actually, when I went to Dunbar, the magnet school, you had a different, you had another set of problems. And because they weren't going to let you just give them, you're going to have to know how to stretch it a little more than 10 minutes. You're going to have to be able to do a little better. So I had to learn if the bell rang, and oftentimes it would, because I would take the conference over I planned it, have Miss Smith to come at so-and-so time. And she most times they're right there. And I just told them, all the parents started noticing that. They said, she goes out and watches her students when that bell rings. And I'll ask the parent, say, come out with me and watch. They don't have time. They want to go back to their jobs too, but I was helping them. That's how I had to manage not giving a whole 30 minutes to one parent, because you have 4 or 5 parents. And if you give 30 minutes, well, that's your morning. You can't do that and be in the classroom to see how the teaching is going on.
I mean, I couldn't, maybe some people can, but that's what I found out, that I almost had to visit classes. And even though I had them divided where Mr. Mathis would go in too for this group, my responsibility would be that whole faculty. I just didn't have to do all that, the write-ups that he would have to do. I had a little form that I would leave them with, a grow thing, you know, something we can grow on. And then what I saw that was good. I just enjoyed that part of the teaching. I didn't do that well with the taking care of the cafeteria and all that, but you have to learn. But I had an assistant principal who liked that. And so I let that be his, but I would always be there. You know, when the bell would ring for lunch, I had to go in the cafeteria to see the sweet children. These are junior high. And they were shocked because I made it my business to learn every student. Basically every student, you know, some students you can't. But most of the students I knew by Christmas.
The Delta Chinese communities often address specific decisions and constraints to buy businesses, opportunities for children's schooling, and acculturation. And this is Susie Toneman, who grew up in Arkansas City.
But we didn't have any trouble in Arkansas City. Now, I think in Dermont, they were a little late letting the Chinese attend public school there. But Arkansas City and McGee did not have any problems. My father was good friends with the sheriff and the doctor of the community. And so we didn't have any trouble with discrimination against us. It was, I guess, the laws that were already in place. I know the black people could not attend the white schools. They had their own separate schools. And I remember if I got a junior high, I would see the black professor bring over students and they would get our used books. So that's how they were discriminated against. But we just didn't have much trouble. We'd get called names, of course, but it didn't bother us. We just kind of looked the other way. We didn't take offense at it. Of course, you know, we lived upstairs over the store.
That's very common from what I've seen from a lot of these families.
Yeah, my father built that store in 1932 in the midst of the Depression. So he had saved up his money.
The fact that he was able to do that in the Depression is pretty impressive.
And you know, actually, the Chinese were not allowed to buy property because of the Exclusion Act of 1882, like that. But I think being friends of the sheriff and the doctors, there was no question, no discrimination about it. So he bought the property and built the store in 1932.
Elise Pang addressed the question of balance in family culture and the community at large.
I think our parents, the older generation, they wanted us to be aware that we are Chinese, to keep the customs, but on the other hand, they knew we had to be assimilated into the white culture. We had to go to school with them, you know, we go to church with them, we do business. So they wanted us to keep both, I believe, but they wanted to be sure that we kept the Chinese customs.
Asian storekeepers and their families were deeply familiar to anyone who grew up on the Delta and often looked like model minorities and courtesy whites from the perspectives of surrounding Anglo and Black communities. However, as members of a community whose migrant adults, and often the oldest children, if born in China, were barred from citizenship, though their youngest US-born children shared birthright status, until that of course obtained until the mid-20th century. They had distinct internal concerns: property ownership, maintenance of legal status, and often issues of discrimination. Several families told us about store burnings and other forms of vandalism. We also received several surprises in the course of the interviews. We approached Viola Meadows because of her preservation activities on behalf of Clover Bend, which is a Depression-era resettlement project in northeast Arkansas that's, northeast, north central, but it's similar to Dias. It was the same Depression initiative. And we selected Ethel Tompkins, also from Lawrence County, because of her childhood experiences in the Hoxie school desegregation and her adult activities in commemorating that event. But we didn't know that Meadows was also acquainted with Charlotte Trotter, the teacher at the Hoxie school, the African-American school, in the mid-50s. And this is Meadows speaking about her acquaintance with Charlotte Trotter.
And I carried the Black Rock, the Hoxie colored teacher, to Little Rock by car because I was going down for graduate school. But my superintendent said, "Hey, Meadows," he called me Callahan, "isn't it about time that you started that master's degree?" And I said, "Well, I really can't afford it right now." He said, I think you can. I said, "I think you need to start it now." He said, "How about this fall?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I can try. We'll see." He said, "Well, I'd like for you to." I thought, that's strange. Why would he want me to do that? You know, I was teaching and I was happy and all that, dating a nice fellow, and I was all right. Well, come to find out, he was trying to hire a degree Black teacher to teach in that Black school. And the Black teacher with a degree would not come. He was working through the State Department, would not come to Hoxie because they had no place to live. They couldn't go to a movie. They couldn't eat in a restaurant. They couldn't socialize except with Blacks, what few Blacks they would know. And they didn't want to come. They wanted to stay in Little Rock where they had activities they could. So he promised the state down there that he would get that Black teacher back to Little Rock on Friday afternoon, and then he would buy the bus ticket for her to ride back to Hoxie on Sunday afternoon.
So you were the ticket
And
home.
I was the ticket down. I was the ticket down, and he bought the ticket back.
And this is Ethel Tompkins speaking about her experience as a student of Mrs. Trotter.
She was a great teacher. She was had a great imagination because she had to be, because the material to teach us was very limited.
Now, am I correct in understanding that basically she had a one-room schoolhouse?
Yes, it was one room.
She was teaching
taught grades 1 through 8.
So she was teaching everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I understand that she had full teaching credentials and that she commuted
from Little Rock here.
So did she board around?
Yeah, she stayed. Let's see. One of the families she boarded Meadows, Viola Meadows. Now, with when she stayed most of the time with Mrs. Meadows, and Mrs. Meadows would sometimes she would drive her to Little Rock to get her home, and she'd come back up on the train. But that was Monday through Friday. She stayed up here. And then she would teach, but like I said, she had to be inventive because she was not supplied with good teaching material, like the books. Okay, most of our books were outdated. We didn't have the things that the others, like the white school, the teachers there. We didn't have a lot of those things. But she invented ways to teach us the timetables, our ABCs, our reading. She almost invented, there was a Schoolhouse Rock that came out quite a few years ago. I think it was in the 80s or 90s. But it was like conjunction. If I was teaching, it was like a way to teach kids about multiplication, reading, conjunctions, and dividing sentences, things like that, through this little tune. Well, Mrs. Trotter, it was not a tune, but she invented ways to make it rhyme, different things to keep us, to get us interested in learning. But these are things that she wrote herself. So when they integrated the schools, I think they were thinking that we would be not retarded, but we would not be up to par with the kids over there because we came from one room schoolhouse without the latest materials. But when they gave us the aptitude test, we tested higher than the white kids. And it was all because of Mrs. Trotter, because she was an excellent teacher. She knew how to make do with things. She wrote and produced little plays that we did, and games and different things. So she was great.
And the two interviews from Northeast Arkansas are complementary in many other ways. Like a number of the other narrators, both women worked their way through college and gave very detailed accounts of those experiences. Meadows also relates her early commitments as an individual to the international world as an exchange teacher in Japan and a Fulbright scholar in India in the post-World War II years. And she went on to marry a vet who did USAID work and to raise their family in the third world. I mean, it was really very interesting before returning to Northeast Arkansas and teaching and the volunteer work that caught our attention about her. And Tompkins had an equally interesting life in the military, in elite honor guards and computer work, and again in the other activities that led her to us. But another area that we ask people about consistently if they had community affairs experience, as many of our narrators did, was, do you think there's a difference in the way that men and women approach community affairs and nonprofit work? And Mary Gay Shipley, founder of that bookstore in Blytheville and of many Arkansas nonprofits and a member of many boards, said yes.
I think they do work in very different ways. I find that women, it seems to me like when women leave a meeting, they leave with a list in their minds of what it is they're responsible for. And they leave little boxes to check off. And I find that sometimes some men, this is just generalization, of course, and not all this way, but they just kind of leave with a vague idea of what's supposed to be happening, and maybe their secretaries will get it done for them and maybe they won't. So, but my experience in the book business was very different because it was a very, it's an industry that's always been very open to people of all races and sexual orientation and gender, and it's just everybody sits at the table with the same sort of seat. Our seats are all the same size. That's not true with everything else. But I do think people work in different ways, and I think you just have to let them work the way they are comfortable working. They're, you know, the things that I do and the way I accomplish what I'm supposed to be doing, that's not going to work for other people. It might not work for other women, and certainly doesn't work for very many men. I don't know very many men that kind of work in that, whose minds work that way. But I do think there's a big difference, and I think when women are in the room and at the table, a lot more gets accomplished.
And here's a second speaker on the same subject, Beverly Morrow, who is now chair of the Arkansas Children's Hospital.
I mean, I just think, you know, men just take this real, you know, you just go from point A to point B. And women, I think, look at the humanity of the situation and take in consideration, I think, of people as being individual rather as a conglomerate. So also women are more empathetic. I mean, I just think it's just you know, women are just so different. It's just, you have more of the compassion, you have more of the concerns. Yeah, it's a big difference. It's a big difference. You know that. I mean, it's hard. It's hard, but I think if you just had to put it in a couple of words, men just feel like there's a straight line from A to B, and women know that to get to B, you might have to do a little zigzag and a little in and out, but you'll still get to B. And a lot of times our B will be more advanced than the men's B.
And I'm going to close these examples by returning to the brief excerpts that I talked about several years ago in this series. One is a couple of comments from Shirley McFarland, who was a founder of the Arkansas League of Women Voters, the version that stuck in the mid-1950s, and also a couple of very short selections from Sybil Jordan Hampton, educator and foundation executive. And what I said about the women and their interviews then holds up pretty well, you know, having worked with those interviews and many more since then. The two demonstrate the generational range of the project. Shirley McFarland is among those who came of age around the time of World War II as a community volunteer. Sybil is a boomer. And Shirley is, and many of the people we talked about in her cohort tend to talk about how they tend to talk about private life and their public activities separately, and focus on how the organization worked, where it led people, and to be very small, democratic D. Sybil Hampton's interviews and those with others in her age cohort often focus on how early and continuing experiences prepare for life's work. And in Sybil's case, that involves an attention to both structure and a vocabulary of moral and cultural nurturance. And I'll just share this wonderful clip from Shirley, which matches another from another League veteran. And this is Shirley talking about being a young mother and getting involved in the League.
The only place you could go and talk about something besides babies. I needed some adult conversation. I think that's how my fellow members felt, because we had a lot of issues that we were concerned about and interested in. And that was the place where you could really find kindred spirits.
And the other story I want to share real quickly, because it's just a beaut, is especially because Shirley herself was well known as both a strategist and as a self-described people person, is her assessment of Marlon Hawkins, who I suspect is known to many, many Arkansas people. He certainly is good old boy, or was a good old boy. And here's Shirley on Shirley McFarland on Marlon Hawkins.
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of Marlon Hawkins, who was the sheriff up in Conway County for many years, and he ran everything. He got you jobs. He'd take mama to the doctor if she didn't have a car and needed to go, which is one way he kept control of the country. But when he died, they went in his attic and they found boxes and boxes of ballots ready to mark or marked already. And I remember vividly, I always liked old Marlon. He was a crook and knew he was, but he was a likable crook. And he says, you know, Shirley, you and I both believe in voting machines, just different kinds.
I really like a woman telling a good ghost story and kind of doing it well. And it's also a bit of a diversion. You know, Mrs. McFarland has a reputation for knowing where many bodies are buried in Arkansas politics and for telling war stories with intimates. And she placed very clear limits on this interview. I mean, she wouldn't tell me lots of stuff that I would have loved to have known, although she told me this story in the context of a wonderful explanation of the voting work that the League was doing. And, but there were things, the League operates by consensus, and there were things she wouldn't tell me about changes in the consensus, and I respected that. I know we're running short on time, and I see that there are questions. So maybe what I should just do is say, it's here. Both the audio and the summaries are posted on the Pryor Center website. And Susan has done Yo Woman work. All of the interviews will be up there. We are winding down, although we are exploring doing a few more with some women's organizations. I am in conversation with others about saying, shouldn't there be daughters of first person plural? Isn't there more work that could be done? With that, I thank you for your attention, and I invite your questions.
Most of
There I am. Thanks to Joe and Susan for that presentation. Now I think some of the questions I saw it's sort of addressed. Essentially, people wanting to know where they can find those interviews, and you've answered that, along with a little preview, a little teaser that more is coming. Okay, but full interviews. Heather Sabindon asked, does the work continue? Are you still interviewing women? And so you did say that you were interested in perhaps passing the torch. So does that mean
I really am interested in passing the torch. And well, Betsy Jakeaway teases me and says, you know, you did a good job, just be happy. There was so much, I mean, I do want to disagree with Michael's comment. I mean, it's certainly the league is, I mean, I can't speak to the viability of the entire League of Women Voters. It has, like a lot of older volunteer organizations, it's got its issues, but they're active in joining with others in lawsuits and the rest of it. They're in there like lots of other people working, and I don't think you can discount that activity. It would be my only comment. And part of as one of our narrators, Sybil Hampton, says, it's million-mile work. So you just keep on doing certain kinds of documentation too. But I am in discussion with a couple of people about whether there are other projects that could be done. There were tons of things we couldn't do, either because of our own timelines. For instance, we couldn't do much with we did interview a few people who were older, of Hispanic extraction, but the whole Latino migration has really occurred since our timeline. So we couldn't do much about that. And that's a very important fact of life in Arkansas. I did a little baseline interviewing about that about a dozen years ago, but it was only baseline. There's been some documentation of Vietnamese and Marshallese presence in Arkansas, but not a whole lot. And I think there's more. Okay, there's more to do there. From Heather. Well, who would we have liked to have interviewed? We still have a list of, a dozen or more, well, probably 24 people. And we actually don't name people until we get the interview. But I mean, we still have a list, and I guess we'd share it with anybody who was serious about picking up the torch.
So you have completed all of the interviews that you are going to do?
Yeah, we said we weren't going to do more than 50, and we got close to 50. And but I would have liked to have done a few more in a number of areas. I would have, I had a, you know, kind of a fallback list of a lot of people that I thought would be interesting to add to the mix. And, but we just had you know, we have a statewide nominating committee, and I would love to, and they're not just in a nominating committee, they're an advisory committee. And it's everybody from Janine Perry to Deborah Baldwin, who is also the head of the other archive we work with. I mean, everything's electronically accessible through Susan Kendrick-Perry and her colleagues at Pryor, but all of the physical records go to Deborah Baldwin and her staff at the Center for Arkansas History and Culture in UA Little Rock. And so you can look up all of our research notes, everything about how we went about doing things, all of our meetings with our advisors. Sarah Beth Estes is among our, I'm trying to, let me just, I actually polled everybody so I wouldn't forget anybody. Lynette Watts, who was the head of the Women's Foundation when we started this, and one of our cheerleaders, Sandra Gordy from UCA, Sybil Jordan Hampton, who was a narrator and became an advisor. Similarly, Diana Gonzalez-Worthen was somebody we interviewed and then came on to the advisory committee. I'm forgetting somebody, which is awful.
Oh, well, that's okay. I've got one other thing I'm curious about. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything new that came in. In my very limited experience interviewing people about their youth or some event, I find that especially elderly people may sort of clam up and not want to, like, if they're, I don't know, they have trouble viewing their story as worthy of being recorded, or they don't think that their vantage point was all that important, you know, or something like that. So I'm just wondering, I know we've only got, you know, like 2 minutes left, but if you'd like to shed a little light, sort of a quick answer to that, how do you sort of warm people up before you sit down to record, and then they sort of repeat some of that when you guys are sort of live, you know, with the red light flashing, or how do you deal with that?
Well, we have a process. Well, first of all, we have a process, and part of it is to offer to share the interview outline with somebody in advance, so they have a sense of what's coming and they can think about it. The second is to base your outline on really accessible questions. So they're everyday questions, like, just like, not quite as basic as what did you eat for breakfast, but that's not a bad one. You know, I mean, you really look for real down-to-earth experiences that you're asking people about, and you move from the most concrete to more general. And I'm not sure I've ever met a boring person. And I mean, that it does help to be truly interested in people and truly curious. but if a person has any kind of curiosity themselves, they usually what's the rest of the thing? I can see Michael's making a comment, but I can't see what it is.
We've got it's 7:30. I'm going to read his comment and then I'm going to close us out. Michael Dugan has pointed out that Arkansas State has oral interviews done around 1980 by Larry Ball and Michael Dugan. Okay, and he said we had to pay 10 cents. We had to pay 10 cents to get one of the state's oldest Black midwives to get her story. So anyway,
10 cents a minute or 10 cents?
Here. Well, hey, thanks everybody. And don't forget, when you hit the leave button in the corner or whatever, however it is you exit out of this, that we'll have a couple of questions for you for the survey. Thanks to Susan and Joe for those wonderful clips of the women interviewed in this project. And we'll see you all again tomorrow.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to unmute so that way I can make sure Donna knows that you may need to stop the recording or whatever, since I know you end up being the host.
I've got it.
Awesome, thanks.